What's up, Flick Connection? Do you love finding those little tidbits in some of your favorite movies where an extra might be found in the background or where somebody generally messed something up? If so, you're going to love what I've got for you today by pointing out some glaring errors that really famous film directors really should have caught. I've actually made this list of the top 10 worst movie mistakes ever by taking a couple of factors into consideration. How big is the movie? So there are loads and loads of horrible movie mistakes I could be pulling from, but a lot of them happen in really bad movies with low budgets or just poor direction. So what I've done is I've really pulled some of the biggest mistakes from some of the best directors, or at least some of the biggest films in history, and I think you'll be surprised at some of the glaring mistakes that somehow made it off the cutting room floor in some of your favorite movies. And finally, I took into consideration, does the mistake ruin anything? Does it ruin a plot point? Does it foreshadow when it shouldn't? Things like that. And obviously, the bigger the mistake, the better, or worse, depending on how you want to look at it, so the higher it made it up on the list. So we're going to start off at number 10 with a Hitchcock flick, North by Northwest. This is one of his biggest movies, and there's a big error that happens in the background in the scene where a gun goes off in a crowded restaurant. As you can clearly see, there's a little boy in the background, and he's covering up his ears because he knows he's about to hear a loud gunshot. And this basically blows the scene because you don't know it's coming, but if you happen to see that little extra in the background, you know something's about to happen. This is really a subtle error that they obviously couldn't really fix in post because he's right in the middle of the frame, and it's not something someone would have really noticed the day of filming. So this one is at number 10 because it's not a horrible mistake, but it is Alfred Hitchcock. It's one of his biggest movies, and the mistake gives away kind of a key moment in the movie. Number 9, this is one of the bigger movies on the list, but it's not a horrible mistake, but it's still one that I see every time, and it just ruins the effect for me. And that's the scene in Raiders of the Lost Ark where Indiana Jones drops down into the temple full of snakes. As soon as he falls, he comes face to face with a cobra, except you can actually see a reflection of the cobra in the glass partition that was between Harrison Ford and a real live cobra. At first glance, the effect is pretty good because it looks like Harrison Ford is face to face with a real live cobra, but there is some glare there. Even if you subconsciously notice the glare, I think it's enough that you notice that there's a glass partition. All right, this is a big one. This one's been all over the internet the past couple of years, but I had to include it, so I'll be brief. In Gladiator, in one of the scenes in the Colosseum, there are chariots, and they're riding around, and one flips over. This one I really can't understand because what happens is the chariot flips over, the dust settles pretty briefly. It's just for a second, but you can clearly see a gas canister in the back of this chariot with a gauge and everything on it, total modern equipment. Now, this is obviously a gas chamber, probably filled with air, that they used to actually flip this chariot over just with the compressed air. The reason I think this is such a glaring error is that scene in particular has a lot of CGI in it. Not a ton, it's not overt, but much of the audience was CGI. Some of the action, some of the violence was at least enhanced with CGI. So this whole scene, every shot is being touched up, and I don't know how somebody missed this giant gas canister that takes up a significant portion of the screen, even if it's only for a couple of frames. And at number 7, I've got another one that a lot of people know, but it really is a good one. It's a classic, and that's the Star Wars head bump. One stormtrooper, he doesn't quite clear the automatic door and just conks his head on it, and they just keep going. This one baffles me a little bit because they had to have done multiple takes of that, even if only a few, and they couldn't get one without him bumping his head. This one for me is just gold because it's not necessarily a bad thing. It's a nice little moment. I certainly didn't notice it for years. Once it's pointed out to me, I see it every time. I don't even believe there's not a sound effect associated with it, but for some reason I hear a conk whenever I see him do it. So I find it as a nice little gem. I'm sure every Star Wars fan ever is way ahead of me on this one, but if you've never noticed it, you'll have trouble not noticing it now. And at number 6, one of my favorites on the list, favorite movies that is, and it's a scene in Die Hard where the SWAT team is getting ready to try to break in, and the terrorist, we'll call him the terrorist, shoot a rocket launcher. They mount a rocket launcher to the floor. You know the scene. They shoot a rocket launcher. Shortly after this, John McClane rigs up a bomb, throws it down the elevator shaft. Well, before that happens, they actually shoot that SWAT tank twice. The funny thing is, they shoot it through the same window twice, and they break the same glass twice. They ultimately just ended up using what should have been the same shot two different ways when they edited the film. This could have been a mistake, or maybe they didn't get a good shot or something happened to the film on the second take where it's through an open window. Either way, it doesn't really affect the film that much. That's why it's not higher up on the list, but it's in Die Hard and I never noticed it, so there we go with number 6. Back to the Future, there's a couple. You will see the speedometer change, meaning it's a different speedometer on a different dashboard. I'm not familiar enough with the DeLorean dashboard to know which one's a DeLorean and which one's something else, but I don't understand how they made this mistake, because that 88 miles per hour is such a crucial plot point, and you see the speedometer multiple times in this movie. How did they... I wish I had more information for you. I don't know how they messed that up and have two different dashes. Now, it's a close-up, and most people aren't really going to notice that, but it is a different needle. It's a different layout of the numbers. It's close enough, but I mean, all dashes, all speedometers at that time would have been black with white numbers, so you can't be that different. I don't know how they messed this one up. The real number 5 on this list is Back to the Future 3. There's a scene at the end, at the very end, where Doc comes back with his futuristic train, and he's now married, and they have a family, and there's a couple of kids behind him, and he's leaning over and he's talking to Marty. So he's talking to Marty over his left shoulder. Presumably his son cannot stop gesturing to his crotch. He wants somebody to know, I think, that he maybe has to go to the bathroom. That's the only thing I can think of. And it's right in the middle of the frame. You can't miss it. You'll notice it every time you watch that movie now. All right, at number 4, I want to mention probably the biggest movie on the list, and that's Jaws. It's not number 1 on the list because it's kind of a small thing. I certainly didn't notice it for a really long time until someone pointed it out to me. But it is a big one. I'm really surprised this one made it into the final cut, because it's a shot you kind of need, but they totally could have cut it. They could have done something. I'm thinking no one noticed it until after the final cut was printed and released, and it's still on the editions that you can get today. It's not been removed, which is good. I'm glad they didn't go back and remove an error. If it made it out to theaters originally, I want to be seeing it now. That's how I want to see the movie. So the scene where the bounty has been put on the shark, and all of the fishermen in the town are loading up in their little boats thinking they're going to go catch this giant shark. There's a great scene where they're all sort of clustered together and they're leaving the harbor. There's a bunch of different shots, but there's one shot, and here it is. It's a wide shot, and you can see way up in the front there is a modern camera with its huge-ass lens pointed back at the other boats. I don't know how no one in the filmmaking industry that was responsible for the edit of this film, I don't know how none of them noticed this giant camera. It seems like that would be something that would register to them immediately, but they didn't catch it, made it on the final film. I think it's great that it's still in there. All right, and another big one with things in the background that definitely should not be there is Braveheart. Now, period pieces are tough. Even things that are made to be filmed in the 1950s, like Back to the Future, all the cars have to be period. All the way down, long shots down the street. Think about that the next time you watch a period movie. Anytime you can see really far into the distance. Nowadays it's a little easier with modern technology, but back when some of these movies were made, they had to address all of that, and it took a really long time, and it's a really underappreciated thing. So, all that aside, with Braveheart, as good as that movie is, as good as all the costumes are and all the sets, they left a white car, a modern car, part of the crew, I guess, in the background during the major battle scene. Everyone's running on the horses. They're all charged up. It's the big speech. They're charging, and somebody's Fiat, it's hard to make out, but somebody's Fiat is parked in the fucking background. All right, and number 2, I don't have just one. I'm going to beat up on Quentin Tarantino. one of the most famous directors alive. He has got so many major mistakes in his movies. It's ridiculous. So he made it to number 2. He really maybe should even be at number 1, but let's just go with it. So big one for me. There's actually 2 in Pulp Fiction. One is the famous scene where guy comes out of the bathroom, unloads the pistol, possibly the biggest plot point in the entire movie. The bullet holes are already in the wall before the guy ever comes out of the bathroom, and it's in the shot. You could argue that it adds to the character of the movie, but really it's just a glaring mistake. And just like my number 10 with North by Northwest, it kind of gives away what's about to happen if you were lucky enough to notice it. Another major error in Pulp Fiction that has to do with a major plot point, not as big as the bullet holes, but it's the infamous red dot on Uma Thurman's chest. They make this big deal about getting the felt mark or the felt pen. He makes this giant mark, you're staring at it, you're staring at them, it goes back and forth, he puts the needle in, she comes up, she's flailing around, the dot's gone. 100% gone. It's not like sort of like underneath the needle. Clear shot of her chest. There's no red dot on her chest anymore. I don't know how they missed that. But another big one where it's just a major continuity error and a major kind of focal point in one of his movies is Reservoir Dogs. And that's the scene where they bring the cop in, not where they cut his ear off, but where they first bring him in. His hands are handcuffed behind his back. They throw him down, they're kicking him. They cut back to Chris Penn for just a second. They cut back and they're getting ready to hang him up, and his hands are cuffed in front of him. That shot to Chris Penn is not nearly long enough to get out a key, which no one had in their hands, uncuff him, wrestle his hands back together, recuff him, and get him. There's no way there's enough time for that. We're talking about a few seconds. So that's a big one to me, but nothing's really as big as those bullet holes and that missing red dot. All right, number 1 is really simple, but it's one of the biggest, most iconic movies on the list, The Shining. And the reason this is number 1 is because it's the biggest, most iconic part of that movie is missing from the beginning of the movie, and that's the hedge maze. In the beginning of the movie, there's this long helicopter shot approaching the hotel. You can see the hotel. You can see the whole grounds around it from far off. There's a lot of the trees are cleared out. You can clearly see a parking lot and then a steep slope. Now, obviously, this was added as a set piece. It wasn't really part of this hotel, but it's completely missing from the establishing shot. The shot that establishes that hotel, the hedge maze is missing, only to be shown shortly thereafter. To me, this was a big one. I don't know how they missed it. I almost feel like they shouldn't have used the shot without it in there, because again, it is the most important part. It's where the climax of the film ends. Metaphorically, there's a lot of importance, and it's just not there. It's not there at all. And another reason this is so big is because Kubrick is known for being so meticulous. Even some things that seem like mistakes in this movie are supposedly not. But I really don't think this hedge maze fits into that category on this movie. I think it's just a glaring mistake in an otherwise fairly perfectly constructed movie. So, what did you think of this list? Did you think there's some things I left off, or do you think I'm kind of being a jerk by adding a couple things on here that really don't deserve it? But let me know in the comments below, and a like and subscribe is always appreciated. It's really helping to grow this channel. Thank you to everyone who has subscribed and who's liking these videos. I really appreciate it. But until next time, thanks for watching.